Thanks so much for being here, you guys. We begin with an important meeting today between Pfizer and federal health officials on a potential coronavirus booster. The drug maker announced plans last week to seek regulatory approval for a third dose amid concerns of waning immunity. That prompted almost immediate pushback from the CDC and the FDA, saying vaccinated Americans do not need a booster right now. This caused, well, understandable confusion, just as for the first time in a long time. The United States is again seeing an alarming increase in COVID cases. Just take a look at this map. 36 states seeing cases up more than 10% in the last week. But look, states in the red again. 11 states are in the red, seeing an increase of more than 50%. These increases are being driven by the unvaccinated. The Delta variant is now the dominant strain in the United States. But I want to play for you how one doctor in Missouri, which is leading the nation in Delta variant cases right now, what he said about this today.
Common denominator for the patients that we're seeing that are sick enough to be in the emergency department is that they're unvaccinated. And if they are sick enough to be admitted to the hospital, they are unvaccinated. That is the absolute common denominator amongst those patients.
The absolute common denominator. We're going to get to that in just a second. Let's begin our coverage with CNN's senior medical correspondent, Elizabeth Cohen. Elizabeth, what are you hearing about this meeting today between Pfizer and government officials?
What we're hearing is that this is going to be a chance for Pfizer to clarify why they think we're already seeing waning immunity for some folks who've been vaccinated with 2 doses of Pfizer's vaccine. What's their proof? What's their evidence? You know, sort of in school, when you had a math problem, you couldn't just say the answer, you had to show your math. And so I think that Pfizer will be asked to show their math. They previously have pointed to Israeli data as evidence that immunity is waning, but that's sort of curious because the Israeli data actually shows that the vaccine does an excellent job of preventing people from getting very sick from COVID-19. So Dr. Anthony Fauci saying that the CEO of Pfizer called him to apologize for not giving him more of a heads up about this statement that made it sound like everyone needs to get a booster, which in fact is not the case. And Dr. Fauci has made it very clear just this morning, saying that Pfizer doesn't get to make the call about when and if people get a booster. Let's take a listen.
What Pfizer did, understandably, they looked at what their data and they say, hey, you know, based on what we see, we think people should get vaccinated with a boost. Well, that's fine, except they're not the official recommending organization.
So again, if you listen to what Dr. Fauci said, he said that Pfizer says based on what they're seeing, they think people need a booster, but they haven't really said what they're seeing. And that's why last week the CDC and the FDA did something highly unusual. They put out a joint statement, and the joint statement was very, very clear. It said Americans who have been fully vaccinated do not need a booster shot at this time. So I think that's quite clear. There's one caveat here, Kate. There are some folks who are immunocompromised, and they know who they are. People, for example, who've received an organ transplant, they might benefit from a third shot. They should talk to their doctors.
Absolutely. Elizabeth, thank you so much for that reporting. Joining me now for more on all of this is CNN medical analyst Dr. Jonathan Reiner. He's a professor of medicine and surgery, of course, at George Washington University, and he's advised the White House medical team under President George W. Bush. Dr. Reiner, it's good to see you again. First, what do you make of this difference of opinion between Pfizer and the government officials on these booster shots being needed now or when?
Hi, Kate. I'm not a fan of science by press release. And I thought last week that the Pfizer announcement was both ill-conceived and really poorly written. I read that over and over and over again, and I couldn't tell whether Pfizer meant that the amount of neutralizing antibodies waned over time, or whether sort of the relative effectiveness of the vaccine waned over time because we have more potent variants. I don't want to hear this information from a corporate press release. I want to hear this from the CDC and NIH. And that's what I think we need to hear going forward.
It looks like, look, something's going to come out of this meeting. In all likelihood, they're all going to be back on the same page with wherever they go, move forward. We will see. Yeah. But now to kind of where we are, sadly, once again in this moment, Dr. Reiner, I mean, hearing from that doctor out of Missouri, we played some of that sound as he spoke this morning, that everyone who is getting admitted to his hospital right now with COVID, everyone, the common denominator, he says, is that they are unvaccinated. Sadly, should that be surprising to anyone at this point?
No, and I can simplify this for the American people. Our vaccines work incredibly well against all the variants, including the Delta variant. And if you get vaccinated, you will be protected from dying. You will not die from this. You will likely not get sick, and you will definitely not die from this virus. So you can do that today. You can go to your Walgreens, you can go to your CVS, you can go anywhere and get vaccinated. But what's happened in this country is that the vaccine has been politicized, and we have this red-blue split. About a third of the new cases in this country are coming out of 5 states: Florida, Arkansas, Louisiana, Missouri, and Nevada. And none of those states have vaccinated more than 70% of their adults. In each of these states, you're seeing exactly what you're seeing in Missouri, which is all these folks coming to emergency rooms sick with the COVID, with COVID, are unvaccinated. It's completely unnecessary. This country needs to get on message. And the message is that we have all the tools we need to defeat this virus. We can't have it both ways. We can't be both unmasked and non-socially distanced and unvaccinated. That won't work. We have to pick sides, and the side is we need to be vaccinated. We have the tools to put this down. We can put it down this summer, but the way to do that is with vaccination.
Look, and you want to talk about an astonishing number. More than 99% of deaths due to COVID right now are people who are unvaccinated. And you look at this map we put up once again, 11 states are in the red, seeing a 50% increase. And this is driven by folks who are unvaccinated. With that in mind, and you talked about this this political divide, I want to play for you something that happened at the conservative annual gathering CPAC over the weekend, which gets directly to this push to get Americans vaccinated.
Because clearly they were hoping, the government was hoping, that they could sort of sucker 90% of the population into getting vaccinated, and it isn't happening, right? There's younger people.
They cheered that people are not getting vaccinated. I mean, what is your reaction to hearing that?
Those people are cheering for our enemy. And it's an enemy that has killed 600,000 Americans. An enemy that killed one of my cousins, that killed the father of one of my closest friends, the mother of one of my partners here at GW, and 600,000 other Americans. A vicious enemy. They are cheering for our enemy. Right? They are cloaking themselves in the flag of the virus when you cheer for inadequate vaccination in this country. How else do these people think we're going to get past this? They don't want to mask up, and they don't want to and they don't want to close down. They don't want to stay at home, and they don't want to vaccinate. Look, we need to grow up in this country. We have a solution to this, and the solution is vaccinations.
Dr. Reiner, thank you for coming on.
My pleasure.
All right, let's turn now to America's gun violence epidemic. This weekend alone, 369 shootings were reported across the United States. And in just hours, President Biden and the Attorney General, they're going to be meeting with law enforcement officials and local leaders from across the country to talk about this very thing, this epidemic that just won't quit. Among those attending is Eric Adams. He's the former police captain who is now the Democratic nominee for mayor of New York City. Joining me now is CNN's John Harwood. He's live at the White House with much more on this upcoming meeting. John, this crisis of gun violence, it clearly shows no signs of slowing. We've talked about police chiefs across the country have talked about the bloody summer ahead. And the president's promised to take this on. But what are they expecting to get from this meeting that will be any different?
Well, it's not going to be a lot different in terms of the steps the president's going to talk about, but some of the things that he's going to talk about are going to be very well received by people like Eric Adams, who is overwhelmingly likely to be the next mayor of New York City. Adams has talked about how Democrats in Congress had devoted more than adequate attention to issues like going after assault weapons, which are behind a lot of the mass shootings in the United States. Very difficult to legislate on that, impossible in the current environment. And what Adams has said is, no, we need to focus on guns, on crimes being committed with handguns and that source of gun violence. Well, President Biden is talking about using the Justice Department and other federal agencies to crack down on unlicensed gun dealers, also on other steps that state and local governments can take through community interventions to reduce violence, through trying to incorporate former felons back into society, various steps of that kind that can have an effect, including hiring additional police officers. Eric Adams has been a big opponent of the defund the police slogan, and President Biden built into the American Rescue Plan, the $1.9 trillion plan, a lot of cushion money for state and local governments that the administration is now saying can be used to hire more police officers, and many local agencies are doing just that right now.
It's good to see you, John. Thank you very much. Coming up for us, still at this. So has woke become a problem for Democrats? It started as a rallying call by black activists to be aware, alert, and informed about social justice issues. But now more and more Democrats are speaking up and saying that the left may be leaning into it too far. Take Eric Adams. He's a former police captain who's just won the New York City's Democratic mayoral primary with a centrist and law and order message. And he now has a message for his party.
We can't be so idealistic that we're not realistic. And we've allowed the fallout of the Trump administration to have an overreach in philosophy and not on the ground real issues that are facing everyday New Yorkers.
So is it fair to call you an anti-woke Democrat?
No, some of us never went to sleep. That's the problem.
Joining me now, Jackie Kucinich, CNN political analyst, Washington bureau chief at the Daily Beast, and Matt Bennett, a Democratic strategist, a former Clinton White House staffer, and co-founder of Third Way, a public policy think tank. Jackie, Eric Adams says, there is a message to be learned from his victory, and he's laying it out there. Do you agree?
I think it depends on where you are in the country. And it really seems when you step back, calling them anti-woke Democrats right now, this is a problem or an issue that the Democratic Party and the Republican Party has struggled with every cycle, trying to deal with the activist part of the party and balance that with the more pragmatic part of the party and what usually makes up a majority. It's always those people in the center, the curse of the moderate Democrat, the moderate Republican, that always feel and always get the activist left put upon in their race. So right now they're trying to navigate that on the Democratic side because they need these activists. They need their energy. They need them to in 2020. So they don't want to stifle them, and they're not going to because they're very loud. But they need them to show up. So that, and we're going to continue to see that as we move through this cycle.
Yeah, and Adams, Matt, his win is the latest example of this debate amongst the Democratic Party, as Jackie's kind of pointing out. I mean, your group did an autopsy after the 2020 election, and one thing that sticks out very clearly to me today as we have this discussion is that you all said Republican attempts to brand Democrats as radicals worked. So what does the emergence of these, quote-unquote, anti-woke Democrats mean?
Well, I think they're learning the lessons of 2020 just as we did when we did that deep dive. What happened in 2020, of course, we won the White House and we got majorities in both houses of Congress. So what we did wasn't really a postmortem because nobody really died, but it was a retrospective. Right. And we did lose 14 House seats. 12 of them were freshmen who did not have deep brand identities. And what Republicans have become unbelievably good at doing ever since, back in the 90s when I was working in the Clinton White House and on the Clinton campaigns, they have become extraordinarily good at weaponizing the brand of the far left in the culture wars. Now, the issues change over time. At one point it was marriage equality for gays and lesbians. That's no longer a thing for Republicans. But now they've attached themselves last cycle to defund the police, and now they seem to be heading towards critical race theory and socialism. And much of it is just a complete lie, what they're saying to voters about these Democrats, but they lie pretty effectively.
Yeah, and Jackie, I would like your perspective on that, because I also hear from folks that this isn't really a real debate or divide within the Democratic Party so much. It's more a problem as Republicans are successfully, the Democrats would say, co-opting a nuanced message. Kirsten Powers was on this morning, and she was talking about really these labels, the woke and anti-woke labels that people are jumping on. Listen to this.
It's now been really misappropriated, mostly by the right, and I think some Democrats are starting to do it as well, to turn it into this kind of boogeyman word, right? And that's not really what it is. I just don't think Democrats should get involved in this anti-woke thing because it's something that's really been driven by the right.
And so, Jackie, if that's the case, is it clear to you that Democrats, that they have a plan to, I don't know, get the message back? I mean, they should lean on Matt first and foremost, but beyond that, to how to get the message back.
It seems like, well, so one of the things that has been working in Democrats' favor in terms of some of this more trying to put the far left or the more liberal side of the party's position on the party at large is Joe Biden. Joe Biden has not been someone that has been backing some of the more left-leaning or leftward proposals. He's not putting political capital behind them. And so it's harder to make it stick. That said, they like to elevate certain parts of the party to put it on other parts of the party. We saw this at the end of 2020. There was that call with Democrats where you had moderate Democrats speaking out saying defund the police is killing me in my district. So, and it's how the message is delivered rather than the nuance of the message. Nuance goes out the window in campaigns. We all know this. So I don't know that they have settled on a message quite yet, but that is going to be something that they're going to be working on, you have to imagine, every day and trying to get the advantage on that.
And even before that, Matt, this could be a really big challenge for Biden's priorities when it comes to big debates on police reform, big debates on infrastructure that we are in the middle of right now. I mean, this is a here and now, not just a 2022 conversation, obviously.
Yeah.
It's good to see you both. Matt, Jackie, thanks, guys. Coming up for us, unrelenting.
President Trump back at CPAC over the weekend on the literal stage and also back to pushing the big lie. The former president used that time on the stage to repeat false claims that the 2020 election was fraudulent, even though there is no widespread evidence of any widespread voter fraud in last year's contest. Still, the former president's baseless claims were a big hit to that crowd in Dallas. The former president left no doubt about the popularity that he still holds in his party. He easily won the CPAC 2024 presidential nominee straw poll. With me now, our chief political correspondent, Dana Bash, and also Mia Love, former Republican congresswoman of Utah. Good morning, ladies. Thank you for being here. Dana, what does it tell you? He takes 70% of the vote in the straw poll for the 2024 GOP presidential nomination, up from 55% in February.
It is just another data point to tell us about the grip that he has on that particular sector of the Republican Party. And that sector of the party is the most powerful when it comes to primary voters in some of these key races, not necessarily general election voters, but in the short term, it's the primary voters that matter the most. What it also says is that I'm old enough to remember when CPAC really did mean conservative, right, and the C stood for conservative. And unfortunately, it now stands for conspiracy, because that is what the former president was pushing, to the wild applause and adulation of the crowd. And it is frightening. Everybody in America should look and see what he did and understand the fact that he got so much, support for the lies and the conspiracy theories that he pushed, and be very, very concerned.
Mia Love, to you, this is one of the most striking, I thought, moments of CPAC, and dangerous from a health perspective. You're going to hear cheering when someone talks about the Biden administration falling short of their 70% vaccination goal date. Let's play it.
Clearly, the government was hoping that they could sort of sucker 90% of the population into getting vaccinated, and it isn't happening, right?
I cut off a little bit early, but there were loud cheers after that, and this even after it was former President Trump who kept claiming and correctly so, some credit for the vaccine. I remember when he said, it was the Trump administration that produced a vaccine in less than 9 months. Well, what does it tell you that there's cheering to missing a vaccination goal?
Well, I think it's unfortunate. I certainly, look, when Frank Luntz was on talking to Jake Tapper, he talked about the fact that people they didn't want to be bullied into getting a vaccination. And the goal is for all of us to be able to get vaccinated. And there's this mistrust. And unfortunately, CPAC actually fed into that bullying. What they're saying is that the United States, the government, is bullying everybody, and so you shouldn't get vaccinated. They're not talking about health concerns. They're not talking about safety. They're not talking about the voters that they're going to need. They need to keep them alive. So they're not talking about the health benefits of being vaccinated. They're pushing on this fear and pushing on the fact that people are not they're not supportive and they're not trusting of the government. And so it's unfortunate that they're feeding on this fear and everybody's cheering. It's quite disheartening.
And really dangerous to people. I mean, a question of life or death at this point for folks. Dana, let's switch gears completely here and talk about the Democratic Party and Eric Adams, who today is going to meet with the president and the attorney general, talk about guns, and the fact that he won the Democratic mayoral primary here in New York City, saying we need the police, right? We need reform, but we need the police. I just wonder what you think of that big picture for the Democratic Party. I mean, the way Axios put it is the rise of the anti-woke Democrat. Is that here in New York, or is that a sign of what is to come across the country leading into the midterms?
Well, I'm going to kind of quote our colleague David Chalian to remind everybody that it is certainly New York, and now we have, since last week, have had the firm results of Eric Adams winning there, but not just New York. It's also Virginia. And those, we don't always know in these off-year elections, whether it's primary or general election, whether or not the results are a harbinger for things to come. But it could be. It very well could be. And the it is in Virginia, Terry McAuliffe won the Democratic primary for governor there. He is definitely not a progressive. He is a, old, what they used to call DLC Democrats, a Bill Clinton middle of the road Democrat. And same, as you mentioned, goes for Eric Adams. There were a lot of other candidates in that race, particularly one who was endorsed by AOC and other very well-known progressives. They did not win. So it's a long way of saying we don't know the answer to your very good question yet, but it certainly is a potential telltale sign that the party, which had, we had thought was sort of taken over by the progressives because they are the most active and the loudest and they have a lot of force, may not be there yet. And probably the biggest example is that Joe Biden is in the White House.
Yeah. Well, there you go. What do you think, Mia? The way that Peggy Noonan put it in her column a few days ago, Democrats have become more extreme on social issues. They aren't prepared for the backlash. If you're a Republican, as you are, running against one of these more progressive liberals, how do you run against? How do you run against that? And are they making it easier for you?
Well, can I just tell you, I love the fact that Eric Adams is out there talking about a little bit of moderation, talking about how these communities need police officers. The defund police is not going to work in any party because, frankly, black families, they want police officers in their neighborhoods. They just don't want black police officers killing their children. Right. So this is something that I think is going to be a good shakeup for the political the political field. You're going to have some good contrast between very left Democrats and someone like Eric Adams, and also Republicans. Republicans are going to have a hard time also because they don't have that comparison to that far left. And they're going to have to be held accountable too to move a little bit further towards the center. So I think it's a really good shakeup. I'm glad that we have somebody talking about some real issues, who says that it's not that he's not woke, he just never went to sleep. So I think it's good that he's out there and he's talking about some of these issues that I think we need to have a conversation about.
Thank you both. Dana Bashmia Love,
see you,
great to
Poppy.
have you. We'll have you back soon. We're
Thank
going to
you.
take a quick break. We'll be right back.
Well, the Texas GOP, like many GOP-run legislatures around the country, moving quickly to pass restrictive new voting laws in Texas during a special session called by the governor. Sunday, Republican lawmakers advanced out of committee 2 bills. They would add new criminal penalties for voting law violations. They would give new powers to partisan poll watchers who show up there at the polling station as you're going in to cast your vote, and restrictions to voting by mail, and ban drive-through and 24-hour voting. Texas is one of many GOP-led state legislatures passing new voting restrictions, despite, we should remind everyone, no evidence of widespread voter fraud in the 2020 election. CNN political director David Chalian is here with me. Okay, so let's talk about this Texas law for a moment. It did take out 2 of the most controversial parts of the original proposal. One, to limit Sunday voting, which is key in African-American communities, souls to the polls, right. But also a thing that's really worrisome, the idea that judges could overturn results even without evidence of fraud. So what remains, what does it do?
Yeah, I mean, you just ticked through some of them, but it ends that 24-hour voting. Yeah. It ends the drive-through voting. Now, these are some things, Jim, that were put into place because of coronavirus, right? The pandemic changed the way that voting officials across the country allowed people to vote. But by now making a law, even though, as you noted, the voting went smoothly, there was no fraud, there's no evidence of fraud. But now, as the pandemic finds itself in a different place, this law just plainly will make it harder to vote than it was in the last time voters went to the polls in Texas.
Okay, does it make it particularly harder or discourage or throw up roadblocks for Democrats versus Republicans? You do have a sort of contrarian point of view that this might be self-destructive for Republicans, but let's be frank, this is politics. It's no accident that these are GOP-run legislatures putting in these restrictions.
You don't get voting bills that aren't crafted in some way for the majority party that in a legislature is crafting it in some way for their political advantage. That's just the nature of what we do in this country. And so Democrats will say, yes, there is evidence by taking out 24-hour voting, by taking out drive-through voting, you are disproportionately affecting Democratic voters. I think the next election, when these things are in place, if this indeed becomes law, will be the actual test for that. But you have the Republicans are saying this is all about election integrity. This is to make our election safe. As you noted, that is trying to fix a problem that doesn't exist. It's a solution for a problem that isn't there. Democrats are saying, no, what you're doing here is actually making it harder for people to vote, and specifically for Democrats to vote.
Now, some of these changes, though, are more transparently, deliberately aimed at Democrats. I mean, for instance, if you look at voting drop boxes, like to limit Harris County, Texas, to 1 voting drop box,
area,
just so you know, around Houston, 5 million people, 1 voting drop box. You know, based on this idea that 1 per county, some counties there have a few 10,000s of voters. This has 5 million, and that's a blue dot in a red state. I mean,
there's no doubt this is a pure political power, and it's why it has become such an animating issue for the left right now. I mean, it is. You are going to see the issue of voting rights, in addition to all sort of the voter protection efforts that the Democratic Party will stand up in the midterm elections. You're going to see it as an issue that actually animates the base of the Democratic Party. And that's why when Joe Biden talks tomorrow in Philadelphia, watch for the response to that. They are stuck with the math in the Senate. They don't have the votes to pass a federal bill right now. But this is going to be an issue that the Democrats are going to take to the country in next year's election.
Let me ask you, so the contrarian point of view, I've spoken with folks who worked on a lot of Democratic campaigns, and one of them said to me something surprising. They said, listen, I know voters, and voters are going to vote. Right? They're going to find a way, and that sometimes if you throw up roadblocks, it becomes a motivating issue, right? I mean, is that we won't know until the next election, but is that something that's
precisely what I'm saying? Yeah, and listen, we've seen the issue of voting has animated both sides at times, but this I think we saw in the run-up to 2020 and what Donald Trump was sort of laying the groundwork for the big lie, and now what we're seeing in this battle, this is going to be a huge motivator for Democrats in these next elections.
David Chalian, it's always a pleasure to have you on.
Great to see you.
Thanks very much. Poppy.
18 million Americans are under heat alerts this morning as a dangerous and record-breaking heat wave just won't quit in the western part of the country. There are parts of the Southwest where it isn't even letting up in the middle of the night. Overnight temperatures in some places not dipping below 90 degrees. The heat is also contributing to Angeles Forest at the edge of the Angeles National Forest. Hi there, Stephanie.
Hi, Kate. Everything you said is scary, but it is so true. And this is exactly why we need people to understand just how deadly this can be. We've already seen it with the heat that we saw in the Pacific Northwest, and this heat is going to persist for the better part of the week here. And these temperatures setting records in all the wrong ways. Even Utah tying an all-time state record in the southwestern corner in St. George on Saturday of 117 degrees. So you're seeing these really high temperatures, and that, of course, leads to the ripe conditions for wildfires. And right now we are seeing that there are some 59 large fires that are burning, and this is some 12,000 plus wildland firefighters that are battling them. It's also worth noting, too, that fires have burned nearly 864,000 acres, and that would actually encompass 4 times the amount of land that there is in New York City. And this burn area that we're talking about is throughout 12 states. The issue that is really of concern here is that these super high temperatures, obviously they lead to us to think about drought. Well, the high temperatures lead to drought, and then the drought leads to more high temperatures. And right now, just to give you an idea how bad it is, by our count, 12 states have either declared a full or partial state of emergency as far as the drought is concerned, a drought declaration, so that they can handle it. This is all a huge problem. And when you look out here right now, I just pulled this off of a tree behind me, Kate. It is brittle, it is dry. This is the ripe kindling for a wildfire, and that is why fire officials are so concerned about this fire season. They're saying fire season is getting longer every single year. By this point this year, we've already burned more acres than were burned last year, and last year was a record year in and of itself, Kate.
Yeah, it's an unending fire season. It feels like you're up against right now. Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you for that report. Coming up for us,